Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this the May the 30th Commission of Planning Commission meeting. If we'd start by joining me in the salute to the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Sue, roll call, please.
Good morning. Mr. Cannon.
Here.
Mr. Herzog.
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Nader.
Here.
Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
Mr. Moss.
Here.
Thank you.
Hey, UC Davis.
Report from Planning Director, EJ.
Good morning, EJ Avaldi. Is this on? All right, EJ Avaldi with Planning Services Division. Seems like we just met last week, right? So I don't have a whole lot to report. We did have a board meeting on Tuesday where the board took up the Placer Retirement Residences project. That was the Granite Bay project. Approved. There's probably 8 or 9 folks who spoke public comment. Kind of evenly divided, those in support and opposed, but at the end the board approved that project. Coming up June 11th at the Board of Supervisors is the Corey Ridge Office Park, another Granite Bay project, and then the Newcastle Wedding Gardens appeal will be heard that day too. And then for Planning Commission, next meeting is scheduled for June 13th in Auburn. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, now would be the time of the meeting for public comment. These would be comments on any item that is not on today's agenda. Is there anybody who would like to address the commission? Seeing none, we will go to the consent agenda, which there is no items on the consent agenda. And we get to sit for about 2 or 3 minutes until we get to 10:05 for our first item.
Good morning. When did you say that next meeting was, the 13th?
13th.
Of July? No,
June.
You said June 14th?
13th.
Oh, PC, okay.
Well, according to official Apple time, it is 10:05. We can go ahead and start with the Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows Base-to-Base Gondola.
Thank you. My name is Heather Beckman. I'm a senior planner with the Placer County Planning Services Division here in Tahoe, and I'm the project manager for the Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows Base-to-Base Gondola project. So today I'm presenting the final EIS/EIR for the project as well as the entitlements. But before I get into my presentation, I would like to briefly introduce some of the key project team members. So from Placer County, I have with me today Ed Staniforth with Engineering and Surveying, Stephanie Holloway, who's a senior transportation planner or engineer, and Lee Chavez with Environmental Coordination. Then I also have with me today a member from the Forest Service. As a reminder, this project, because it crosses both private lands and public lands that are managed by the Tahoe National Forest, this has a federal NEPA EIS component to it. So Joe Flannery is my counterpart. He's in the audience today. He's the former Tahoe National Forest Winter Sports Specialist and the current Public Information Officer. And then also with me today, I have our EIR consultant, Sean Bechta with Ascent Environmental, as well as John Gard with Fair and Piers, and he's the traffic consultant. And then from the applicant's side, Squaw Valley Ski Holdings, I have Ron Cohen, the President and Chief Operating Officer behind me, and Adrian Graham, who is their CEQA and planning consultant. So in terms of the location, it's the gondolas connecting the two ski resorts. Generally speaking, the resorts are located southwest of the town of Truckee and west of Tahoe City. In terms of the project overview, the gondola is intended to be aerial transportation between the two resorts. Each cabin would carry up to 8 passengers, and a total of 400 passengers could be carried each hour in each direction. And travel time from base to base is about 16 minutes. And the gondola would operate in the wintertime only. And as I'll get into in a little bit greater detail in the presentation, we are proposing to better define what wintertime means. And so wintertime, what we're proposing would mean when both resorts are open for winter sports recreation, or November 1st, whichever is later. And closing would be when one resort is closed for winter sports recreation, or May 31st, whichever is earlier. And it's important to point out that the original project did include the use of GASX avalanche exploders on the Alpine Meadows side of the alignment. After the release of the draft EIS-EIR, there was a lot of public comment and concern about the GASX, and so the applicant did decide to remove the GASX from the project entirely and is just using traditional avalanche mitigation methods. So in terms of the entitlements and the actions requested, ultimately this project, the decision maker is the Board of Supervisors. So I'm asking for a recommendation from you to the board, and it would be to certify the Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows Gondola EIR. It's also requesting an approval of an amendment to the Squaw Valley General Plan and a lift map within that plan. There's a rezone needed in Alpine Meadows from neighborhood commercial to open space, and then approval of a conditional use permit to allow for the ski facilities. Now, in this slide, I want to get into the CEQA NEPA process a little bit. So as I said, because the project crosses both private lands and public lands, which are managed by the Tahoe National Forest, we have to have both the CEQA and NEPA review. And so we early on, the Forest Service and County decided to partner up and conduct the environmental review together. So the steps that were common to both agencies were the issuance of the draft and final EIS-EIR. And that final EIS-EIR came out on April 5th. And then after that, we have separate processes, and very importantly, each agency has our own approval for the project to move forward. So from the CEQA or county side of things, after the release of the final document, I took the project to both Squaw Valley MAC and the North Tahoe Regional Advisory Council for their recommendation to you. Planning Commission today, and then the Board of Supervisors will be following. And we are targeting a Tahoe meeting location. From the Forest Service side of things, they have one sole decision maker, and that's the Tahoe National Forest Supervisor. His name is Mr. Eli Alano. And that decision is issued in what's called a record of decision. So a draft record of decision was issued on the same date as the release of the final EIS-EIR, and I'll get into what that decision was in the next couple of slides. But with the release of the draft ROD, that opens a 45-day pre-decision objection period. And what that means is that any person or entity who established legal standing by commenting on either during scoping or at the draft EIS-EIR level can object to the draft record of decision. After the close of the 45 days, the Forest Service will review any objections, which they are currently in the process of doing, and ultimately they issue a final record of decision. And that final ROD can be the same as the draft or have small to wholesale changes. They don't have any public hearings as part of their process from this point forward. Before I get into a discussion of the entitlements, I want to talk about skier visitation, because one of the first things that the project team that we asked ourselves was, does the gondola result in more of an attraction, drawing more skiers to the resorts, or is it an amenity? Is it simply adding that transportation, that connection between the resorts? And ultimately, in our analysis, we found that it's both, but I want to walk you through how we got there. First, I want to define what a skier visit is. A skier visit is when one person skis one time. So if I ski 10 times in one season, that's 10 skier visits. And what national and regional trends have shown us, the data has shown us for over the last 20 plus years, is that that number of skier visits isn't really growing. So that market is static. And so resorts are constantly vying to maintain their market share and then, of course, try and grow it if at all possible. So what is it that is getting skiers to the mountains? And so again, the data has shown us that overwhelmingly it's the snow conditions, it's the quality of the snow and the amount of the snow that is getting skiers to the mountains. And trailing after that, and what's under the control of the resorts, are things like resort capacity, amenities such as retail, restaurant, lodging, ticket pricing, but also capital improvement projects and the curiosity factor that comes with that. Adding more amenities to the resorts can be a draw. And what we have found over time, and what the data has shown, is that when you add something new, so it's an upgraded lift, a new terrain park, or in this case, a gondola, you get that draw, that initial curiosity factor, and you get a bump in skier visits. And then as that amenity starts to normalize to the resort, it flattens out, and then you get that diminishing return. But in the end, the goal and the intent is to retain that market share. So in our analysis, what we found was that resultant of the gondola, there would be about a 1.4% increase in skier visits over what we see today, and that would be in the first year. And then there'd be a diminishing returns, and by the end of the fifth year, there would be a 0% increase. So now I'd like to talk about the entitlements. As I mentioned, there's a general plan amendment required for the Squaw Valley General Plan. There's a map within that general plan called the Future Potential Ski Lifts Map, and that shows all future possible ski lifts. So we are proposing to amend or append this figure you see on the slide, showing the proposed gondola alignment. The general plan further states that to add any new ski facilities, a new lift, that traffic, parking, and circulation must be able to accommodate that new development. So going back to that skier visitation slide and that 1.4% increase with diminishing returns, we do have a commensurate increase in vehicles that we would see on the road. So what we would see is I want to make clear that when we're seeing these additional vehicles on the road, it's going to be at discrete points in time. So it's going to be in the wintertime only when the gondola is operating. And it's going to be on those peak Saturdays and Sundays where it's a holiday or a high-quality snow day where we're going to be seeing these additional cars. On a peak Saturday, we could see up to 211 additional cars coming in and out of the resorts, and on a peak Sunday, it would be 216. So as a result, we do need to address this increase as per the Squaw Valley General Plan. And the General Plan states that with capital improvements or other offsets to offset traffic and parking concerns, we can find consistency to approve the lift. And so I have a list up here of a number of items that are recently online, have been online for several years, and or are coming online. Just this last year, Squaw and Alpine implemented the Mountaineer, which is an app-based transit service or system. Basically, there are shuttles that take anybody residing in the respective valley to the respective resort. So although my data ends at March 15th and the Mountaineer continued beyond that, it had extreme success with over 60,000 riders by March 15th of this year. So that's getting cars out of the valleys and out of the parking lots. There's also been the use of parking and traffic alerts, letting potential customers know when traffic is getting busy, when parking lots are getting full, helping people make decisions as to whether or not to get on the road and come to the mountain. This year, Squaw also implemented the Protect Our Winters carpooling program, so again, incentivizing fewer cars and reducing on the parking. The 3-lane coning program has been implemented in Squaw for a good number of years and has been successful in reducing congestion within the valley. And this last year, there was a free park and ride shuttle service on weekends. That was a collaborative effort between Squaw, Alpine, North Star, Placer County, TTUSD, and the airport district. Basically, people could get shuttled in from either Truckee or Tahoe City to one of those 3 ski resorts. And although it had lesser ridership or lesser success than the Mountaineer did, we do feel that with greater education and marketing, we can get a lot more people on those shuttles and getting cars off the road. And then finally, Placer County recently was awarded a $600,000 grant for the Resort Triangle Transportation Plan. So that's a plan and implementing strategy, or it's to develop a plan and implementing strategies to reduce traffic and congestion in the Resort Triangle. So that would be on State Routes 89, 28, and Highway 267. So with all of these, either online or coming online, we feel that we can find consistency with the general plan to allow for this lift. At Alpine Meadows, there's a rezone required. So the left-hand figure, this light yellow area shows the existing zoning of neighborhood commercial at the Alpine Meadows base area. This is where the existing lodge and ticketing and restaurant and retail areas are. Not lodge, but ticketing, retail, and restaurant. And it's intended, neighborhood commercial is intended to support those types of activities. The ski facilities, however, require open space zoning. So the proposal on the right-hand side is to keep the same neighborhood commercial polygon, but within that, this blue rectangle is the proposed rezone to open space to allow for the Alpine Base Terminal. And then finally, a conditional use permit is required for all ski facilities, and really it's just to ensure that the use is compatible with surrounding uses, making sure that we're doing the right conditioning and so forth. And now I'm going to start getting into the environmental analysis, and so it's the time for me to talk about alternatives. So as is required in both CEQA and NEPA, we're required to review the applicant's proposed alignment, and the original proposal is Alternative 2, which is the westernmost alignment here. And then, as per CEQA and NEPA, we do need to evaluate alternatives that likewise achieve the project goal, but respond to environmental issues that were raised during scoping. So we developed 2 more action alternatives. So we have Alternative 2, the original proposal, and Alternatives 3 and 4, each getting more eastward. I also do want to mention that what we typically see under CEQA is we do the full analysis for the proposed project only. NEPA, however, requires a co-equal analysis of all of the action alternatives. So what that means in this case is that for alternatives 2, 3, and 4, the project has been designed, engineered, and analyzed to an equal level. And so that means our decision makers can approve, condition, or deny any one of those 3 alternatives. And then, of course, we had a no project alternative reviewed as well. So there were several key issues that drove the formulation of our alternatives. Then these issues came up during the scoping process. And first relates to the Granite Chief Wilderness area, which is shown in the dark green here. This is a NEPA or Forest Service only impact. The Granite Chief Wilderness area, or the wilderness designation, precludes any development or improvements in this area. And so the concern was that Alternative 2 was quite close to the wilderness area. Second is the concerns about the federally listed and endangered species, the Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog. At the time the applicant submitted their application and Alternative 2, the frog was a listed species, but it wasn't until 1 year later that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issued their critical habitat map. And at that point in time, we found that Alternative 2 is fully inside the critical habitat, and our field studies also indicated that a small lake called Barstow Lake had a frog in it, so we had occupied habitat as well. And then finally, the visual impacts. There was concern, so when the gondola is located in the base areas next to developed ski infrastructure and the built-out areas, it's compatible with the built environment. But it's once it crosses the ridge line between Squaw and Alpine and into Alpine Meadows that it's crossing a sparsely vegetated granite ridge line and a largely undeveloped forested area. So there's a contrast there, and there was concern about that. So that's the development of our 2 additional alignments. So now I want to talk about the alternative that was selected. So CEQA requires that we identify the environmentally superior alternative, and in this case it was Alternative 4. And then getting back to NEPA and the draft record of decision that was issued concurrent with the final EIS-EIR, the Tahoe National Forest Supervisor approved Alternative 4 as well. And so the rationale for both of these is that Alternative 4 is the easternmost alignment, so that means it's gotten farthest away from the Granite Chief Wilderness. It has the least impact to the Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog, so portions of Alternative 4 are outside of the critical habitat, and it's the farthest away from the occupied habitat. And it also has a reduced visual impact. So going back to the previous slide, alternative 2, the original proposal, traverses quite a great distance along the ridgeline, and so it's highly visible from both near and far. Whereas alternative 4, once you get to the top of the ridgeline at Squaw Valley, it pops up and over the ridgeline and down into what we refer to as Cache Valley on the privately held Caldwell lands. So the natural topography of the valley and the vegetation help to shield the gondola from view. The gondola alignment still does cross over the Five Lakes Trail. All 3 alignments, however, do cross over the Five Lakes Trail. So with that was why alternative 4 was the environmentally superior, and ultimately the applicant chose to move forward with alternative 4 for entitlements. So in a way, we can say that this is the environmental review process doing its job. A proposal was submitted, alternative 2. We analyzed it, and we're able to find a superior, environmentally superior option, and that's what's being moved forward for permitting and approval. So now I'd like to quickly walk you through where the gondola is located. So here we're in Squaw Valley at the Squaw Valley Terminal. So this would be the terminal location. Here's the Funatel as a point of reference. The terminal is proposed in proximity or the same location as the existing Red Dog lift. And it can be located there. It has been engineered, and skier circulation can work with that. But as you know, just last Thursday, your commission approved a use permit modification to move the Red Dog lift. So the Red Dog lift bottom terminal has been proposed to be moved to approximately here behind the Red Wolf Lodge. So that was approved, and the appeal window closes this Monday on that. Moving the Red Dog lift just allows for a little bit better skier circulation and frees up some of the impacts that would occur near the ski school area. But again, the gondola, it has been analyzed and determined that these 2 lifts can be co-located. So if Red Dog were to remain, the gondola and Red Dog could be in the same location and still function. Here we have the Squaw Mid Station, so it's at the top of the ridge. Just as a point of reference, this is the top of the existing KT lift. So the gondola would be just to the west and slightly topographically lower. Here's the Alpine Meadows Mid Station. It's on the privately held Caldwell land. And then finally, the Alpine Meadows terminal is located near the base and between the existing Hot Wheels and Roundhouse lifts. So now getting into the draft EIS-EIR, we did receive a very high number of comments, 207 in total. The main areas of comment were concerns about the Granite Chief Wilderness. Again, that's a Forest Service NEPA concern, not something under the CEQA realm. There were also concerns about visual impacts. Primarily the concerns were the visual impacts from inside or from the Granite Chief Wilderness, but also from the Five Lakes Trail. And concerns about traffic impacts resultant of the gondola. And finally, there were other concerns that some people stated that they simply didn't want the resorts connected. They wanted Alpine to stay Alpine and Squaw to stay Squaw. Concerns about the frog, and as well as impacts specific to the other alternatives. Now, in this slide, I'm trying to show you those resource areas we did analyze. On the left-hand column were those areas that were analyzed, and resultant of the gondola, there would not be a significant impact. The right-hand column shows those resource areas where there's a possible significant impact, but after applying mitigation measures, that impact would be reduced to a less than significant level. There were, however, 6 significant and unavoidable impacts in transportation and circulation, visual character, and noise, and I'll quickly walk you through those. As it relates to transportation, again, back to skier visitation, we would have that potential 1.4% increase, and therefore that increase in vehicles on the road. So as a reminder, on a busier Saturday or Sunday, meaning in the wintertime only, and on a peak holiday or snow timeframe, we'd have a possible 211 cars on a busier Saturday and 216 on a busier Sunday. So getting to the specific impact, it's in the existing plus project conditions, so meaning directly resultant of the gondola on a Saturday morning while heading north on State Route 89 and turning into Alpine Meadows, there'd be an increased queue length at that traffic signal. The mitigation measure would be to increase the green time at that light, and it would reduce the impact to a less than significant level. And although Caltrans has verbally told us that they're willing to do that, until that's formalized, we still have to consider it significant and unavoidable. The next three impacts are in the cumulative scenario, so that means existing conditions, gondola built, and all future and foreseeable projects built out. So think the village-specific plan, Alpine Sierra subdivision, Plump Jacks, all of those projects built out. The impacts we would all see in the Caltrans roadway facilities, and it would include things like worsening the existing unacceptable level of service on the Sunday PM peak hour, and this would be specifically in the roundabout at State Route 89 and 80 in Truckee. There would, again, be that increased vehicular queuing at the Alpine Meadows on the Saturday morning, and then increased roadway volume to capacity ratio on the Sunday PM peak, leaving Squaw Valley headed towards Truckee. The mitigation measures for all three of those are to comply with the Placer County Trip Reduction Ordinance, including a transportation demand strategy. So the intent of all of that is to come up with implementation measures to reduce the traffic and the impacts. But even with that, we cannot say with absolute certainty that it would be reduced to a less than significant level. I do want to point out, however, that, again, all of these three impacts are in the cumulative scenario. And in the cumulative scenario, we have the build-out of the village-specific plan. And what that really helps is to build out that destination resort concept, or a ski and stay concept. And so the thought being that with this amenity, these greater amenities, rather, in the resorts, we're drawing more out-of-area people to the resorts who typically stay longer. So we're getting more midweek stays, and so instead of concentrating these impacts on the weekends, we're dispersing it throughout the week. In our traffic analysis, we have conservatively assumed that every single one of these visits, these new visits, are coming from out of the valleys. Rather, we're not taking into the account this ski and stay concept. And so with that, it's overly conservative, which is the job of CEQA, to look at the conservative scenario. But it is very distinctly possible that in a cumulative situation that this 211 and 216 cars that we might see could be slightly reduced because of that sort of destination resort build-out. Getting into the visual character, as I stated before, in the base areas, the gondola is compatible with the surrounding development. It's once it gets over the ridgeline that it contrasts. The mitigations are to comply with county and Forest Service design review processes, making sure that colors, materials, lighting, reflectivity do their best to minimize the visual impact. But it would still be visible in contrast with the environment. I do want to walk you through a few of the simulations. And I also want to reinforce that Alternative 4, as I mentioned, drops into Cache Valley, so it's shielded by the natural topography of the valley, whereas the originally proposed project traversed a great distance along the ridgeline and was far more visible than Alternative 4. So in this simulation, we're on Squaw Valley Road, and I pointed out where the midstation and towers would be. In this simulation, we're now in Alpine Meadows. We're in a residential area on Chalet Road. We're looking northward towards the ridgeline between Squaw and Alpine, and so I pointed out a few towers there. Here, the next few simulations are on the Five Lakes Trail, and so what's referred to as Switchback 1, the gondola would not be visible. On Switchback 2, there is a tower that would be located quite close to the trail itself, so it would be visible there. Highly visible. And then finally, what we refer to as Water Break Hill, there would be a few towers visible from that location. Then there's also an impact related to construction noise specific to helicopter use. So the general construction noise for the heavy equipment, we have noise ordinance exceptions that allow for that as long as the project meets certain mitigation measures, which this project does. But it's the helicopter use up to 20 days in both valleys and over the ridgeline that's the impact. The mitigation is the project and the applicant has committed to completing the construction in one building season, so it'll be limited in time frame. And we do have helicopter flight paths that have to be approved to avoid residences and specifically avoiding the Granite Chief Wilderness area. But despite this, there would still be a noise impact. The alternative would be traditional ground construction, so meaning just heavy equipment that could result in additional disturbance on the ground, as well as it would very likely not be able to be constructed in one season. After the release of the final EIS EIR, we did have staff is proposing a few changes to some resource protection measures. And I want to explain or define what a resource protection measure, or RPM, is. The Tahoe National Forest NEPA process requires the use of what's called RPMs, but from the CEQA standpoint, it is the exact equivalent of a mitigation measure. So essentially, these changes that I'm going to present are essentially asking to revise some mitigation measures. So the first is RPM NOI 1. This has to do with noise. The Squaw Valley is required to have a noise disturbance coordinator. And initially, that if there was a noise complaint, the disturbance coordinator was to look at the complaint and compare it to the Placer County noise ordinance and noise standards. But as I mentioned previously, we actually have an exception within the noise ordinance for construction, as long as the project meets certain mitigations about constructing days and times, muffling devices, which the project does. So that was incorrect for us to have it be compared or applied to the noise ordinance. So we're proposing to remove that language, but as a further safeguard, we are including language that the applicant's disturbance coordinator must consult with Placer County or Forest Service staff on any complaints and the resolution of those complaints. The second change is to RPM NOI 6, so again in noise, and this has to do with the days and times of construction. So within the noise ordinance, typical days of constructions are Monday through Saturday. After the release of the draft EIS EIR, there was a public comment with concerns about impacts to the Five Lakes Trail and Granite Chief Wilderness, and that's when they are most heavily frequented by hikers and recreationists. So in response to that, staff revised the RPM in the final EIS EIR and indicated that construction would be Monday through Friday only. After seeing this, the applicant came back to us with a very legitimate concern that they might not be able to complete their construction in one building season. And to be clear, our environmental analysis is predicated on building in one season, and the project is conditioned that way. And so, and to give you a little further context as to why the need to construct on Saturdays is so important, a lot of it has to do with the helicopter use. So the helicopter use is really limited to about a 10-week time frame, somewhat in the middle of the construction process. So the construction process will start with preparing the site, grubbing and clearing, and it's only after that point when the helicopter can come in, be used for tree removal, bringing in heavy equipment, towers, and mid-stations. So in that 10-week time period, if we eliminated Saturdays, that eliminates about 17% of their possible days to construct, so severely limiting their ability to construct in 1 year. And furthermore, there are very few helicopters in the area, and many of these helicopters that SQUA is contracting with are also contracted with local fire jurisdictions, and they have the right of first refusal. So that helicopter that may be scheduled to construct the gondola could be called away to fire. So for that reason, we are proposing to insert Saturday's construction back into the RPM to allow for normal ground construction and helicopter use, but being mindful of the noise impact, any rock blasting would be prohibited on Saturdays. And then finally getting to the final change, RPM MUL-4, and this goes back to the winter season. Winter season was initially defined as that time is when both resorts are open for skiing. And we got a lot of public comment at both the MACs, from the MAC members and from the public, about concerns first that the gondola might operate in the summer. And to be clear, it cannot. The environmental analysis did not include that, and the project is conditioned for wintertime only. But even taking the summertime component out of it, there was concern that winter season wasn't defined. And so we are now suggesting the definition to be as both opening when both resorts are open for snow sports recreation or November 1st, whichever is later, and closing as when one resort closes for snow sports, or May 31st, whichever is earlier. So after the release of the final EIS EIR, the county did receive 5 comment letters. I think they were all in the last week or so. And then the Forest Service did receive 11 objections on the draft record of decision. As it relates to all of these, but specifically to the county comments, staff and our consultants have reviewed them, and we feel that these letters are really reiterating, restating, reemphasizing comments and concerns that were issued, expressed at the draft EIS, EIR level, and have been responded to in the final EIS, EIR level. We will be formulating formal responses to these 5 comment letters, and we'll be providing them to the Board of Supervisors. But generally speaking, the comments centered around impacts to the Granite Chief Wilderness, visual impacts, construction noise impacts on the Five Lakes Trail. There were concerns that the gondola might support the White Wolf subdivision on the private Caldwell lands. That's a project that is currently in its initial review stages with the county. Traffic concerns, and comments about temporary construction access roads. So I'd like to get into general plan consistency. As you know, each project that comes before you must be found to be consistent with all the applicable general plans. In this case, we have 3, the Placer County, Squaw Valley, and Alpine Meadows general plans. And the overarching policy considerations, first, they include all 3 general plans have language speaking to the need to maintain a high level of winter sports recreation resources in the area. Alpine Meadows and Squaw Valley have been here for decades and decades, and they have provided that resource for our locals, the region, and for tourists from afar. And so these resorts have really become anchors of our community, part of our local identity. And so maintaining that high level, which the gondola does by providing that amenity and connectivity, is key. And as I mentioned, the ski visits aren't really growing, and so that market share is not changing, and the ski resorts are vying to maintain their market share. All 3 general plans speak to maintaining our economic development, our economic base, and growing it if at all possible. And so maintaining a relevant ski resort resource is key to that. In the Tahoe region, we have over 10 ski resorts that people can choose from, so it's a very tough market. And so again, creating that connectivity, creating that rich resort experience is key to maintaining that economic development. And this economic development, to be clear, I mean, it helps the resort's bottom lines. But it goes far beyond that. It's part of our economic base for our local community, for Eastern Placer County, but extending beyond to the Tahoe region as well as the town of Truckee. All 3 general plans also speak to the need that development should not impact the environmental or aesthetic resources. And again, with choosing alternative 4, the environmentally superior alternative, as well as the reduced visual impact, we feel we can find consistency with that. All 3 general plans also speak to transportation and circulation and being able to accommodate that. And as I mentioned in a previous slide, again, we feel we can find consistency with that. So staff is recommending that we can find consistency overall with the general plans. So I'll touch upon the MACs that I went to. So Squaw Valley MAC, there was a lot of discussion at both MACs actually. Squaw Valley discussed the concern about summer operations, and again, to reiterate, the gondola analysis was for wintertime only, so any summertime operations would have to come back for additional environmental review and permit modification. So, but there was significant discussion around that. Concerns about construction impacts and closures on the Five Lakes Trail, traffic questions in Granite Chief Wilderness. But ultimately, they found that the benefits outweighed the impacts. There was a unanimous recommendation of approval at 4-0. They did recommend better defining winter season, which we have. They wanted specific and advanced notification about Five Lakes Trail closures, and to maximize the use of helicopters as opposed to temporary construction roads. And then at NITRAC, very similar discussions, also lengthy. They also included discussions related to the Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog. They had concerns about cumulative impacts broadly, as well as speaking to White Wolf subdivision. But again, they noted that the benefits outweighed the impacts. Ultimately, there was a recommendation of approval, 5-1. One council member did recommend the no project alternative. And then finally, they wanted us to better define the winter season and reinforce the concern about summertime usage. So with that, I'm asking that your commission recommend to the Board of Supervisors to adopt a resolution to certify the EIR. That would include adopting the Mitigation and Monitoring Reporting Program, and also the findings of fact and overriding considerations and the errata, all of which are included in the staff packet. Also to adopt a resolution to amend the Squaw Valley General Plan and the potential future ski lifts map within that plan. So again, it's appending the alternative for lift alignment to the map. Adopting an ordinance for a half-acre rezone at Alpine Meadows from neighborhood commercial to open space, and then to approve a conditional use permit for the ski facility. And with that, I'm done. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Heather. Any questions?
Heather, I wanted to ask about the comment letters that came in reference to the draft EIR.
Okay.
There was 207 you mentioned, and as you also referenced at our hearing on the draft, we had a lot of comments related to the GasX avalanche
Yes.
control system. But in the 4 things that you commented about was dominant in those 207 comments, you didn't mention that GasX. I know it's been removed, but I'm just curious how many of those of the 207.
That's a very good question. I'm glad you point that out. There were actually a very large number of comments on GasX. I didn't mention it in this presentation
Right.
because it was entirely removed from the project, but that was an overwhelming concern.
Yeah, because that, obviously that was pretty dominant again in our hearing, and so I was just a percentage of that 207. I don't know if you.
I couldn't tell you a percentage off the top of my head. I actually do have a cheat sheet somewhere in my files that breaks it down, but it was a very, very large number.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? Mr. Cannon?
Heather, I have a question. When you come up with this number of 211 cars on Saturday and Sunday, 216, and I apologize if I missed it in the voluminous materials that we all had the luxury to review, where do you come up with that number, and then how does that factor in with the commercial car companies that are bringing more people to these resorts and not leaving vehicles there? So there's a lot more drop-offs.
So I'll give a little introductory as to how the basis for formulating that number, but it does get fairly technical, and so at that point I'll pass it off to John Gard with Fair & Piers, our traffic consultant. But the basis really started with that skier visitation analysis, and so again it was that 1.4% increase. By the end of the 5th year, that would be just under 37,000 new skier visits coming in over what we see on average today. The traffic consultant that did do some traffic studies that looked at, and I think it was in the 16-17 year, that looked at the cars coming in on some peak days, looked at the ridership in those cars, and that data combined resulted in the ultimate final numbers. And at this point, I think I will pass it off.
Good morning, members of the commission. My name is John Gard with Fair & Piers in the Roseville, California office of Fair & Piers. We prepared the transportation analysis for the proposed project before you this afternoon or this morning. Table 47-13 of the draft EIR-EIS depicts the trip generation of the project. And as Heather mentioned, 36,856 new skiers is the expected number of new skiers generated annually. What we did then was to assign those skiers across the ski season. It was the 2016-2017 season, to those days that didn't have fully built out, the parking wasn't totally full. We can't put more skiers into parking where it doesn't exist. So I won't get into too much detail here, but Table 13 depicts how the trip generation was calculated. And so really the trip generation is a function of several things. The new skiers that will arrive due to the amenity versus attraction that the gondola is, a limited number of new employees and their trips, the shift in trips that goes from one resort to the other. If you delve deeply into the transportation analysis, you'll notice that with the gondola is going to allow, if you're going southbound on 89, you could get to Squaw Valley first, and then, not have to drive to Alpine, and the reverse is true if you're coming from the, from the basin. So there is a consideration of the shift in trips between the two resorts, that's shown in Table 13, and then also the elimination of the shuttle. When the gondola runs, the shuttle that runs between Alpine and Squaw won't run. Obviously, that's what the gondola will provide. So when you look at it on a daily basis, according to Table 13, on a Saturday, the Squaw Valley ski area generates actually 56 fewer trips. On a Sunday, actually 1,100 more trips on a total daily basis. And then Alpine Meadows, 382 more trips on a Saturday, 794 less trips on a Sunday. Again, the premise being on a Sunday, it's Sunday afternoon, you've skied the whole weekend. If you end up being at Squaw Valley, it's a little quicker to head to 80 because you're sort of further ahead in the line of cars, so to speak, a little bit. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, Mr. Cannon, but hopefully it provides some insight. I'll be here the rest of the day if we want to get into more detail.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Let me see, you mentioned a rezone for the terminal in Alpine Meadows. And I guess it appears that that terminal is on National Forest land.
Yes.
And so, yeah, could you explain that?
So a large portion of Alpine Meadows, if not the whole, large portion of Alpine Meadows is on Forest Service lands. And so there's a special use permit that the Forest Service has issued and will modify to allow for the ski facilities. And sorry, I'm just trying to get back to that slide. So it is allowed to be there under the special use permit from the Forest Service.
And so how does the county zoning fit into that if it's in a special use permit?
So the Forest Service has their own special use permit, and I'll speak to it broadly, and then if it pleases your commission and or Joe Flannery would like to clarify. So that is separate and apart from ours. Our conditional use permit and our zoning with under the county is a separate entity, and so we have our own sort of way of looking at it, so to speak, but that doesn't impact how the Forest Service operates with their special use permit.
Okay, well,
That might not have been a satisfactory answer, but Joe, I'm sure could elaborate a little more.
I think it's probably not a big point. I was just confused why the county would be zoning on National Forest land, but that is something that's done. Is that correct?
Yes, and these lands already have zoning underneath it as well, so that zoning exists even though it's on Forest Service lands.
Okay. Let me see another question. There's going to be some road construction in Alpine Meadows Valley, and has that been surveyed or designed, or is that going to be a permanent or temporary, or what's the nature of the road
Sorry,
construction?
I'm trying to get to the figure where we can talk about it. Here we go. And so I'm sorry, your construction road access was specific to the Alpine side or the Squaw side or both?
Well, I think it's the Alpine side that.
And we have had a lot of comment on that at the MAX and in the recent comment letters. So there is an existing road on the private Caldwell lands. So these are the Caldwell lands. And so we do have an existing road about in this area. And so that existing road can be used, sort of serve double duty, and we can use that to construct the gondola. There are possible minor modifications, possible extension to that construction access road to complete the full alignment, if you will. And this road, if I'll point out, it's in turquoise. It also goes underneath the red line, alignment line as well. So it goes pretty far up. So that existing road would be used. Any modifications to it would be temporary. We have conceptually looked at them, or a little bit more than conceptually, but at the time, were this project to be approved and come in for permits, The fully proposed construction access route and any modifications would be reviewed at the Placer County Improvement Plan level, as well as the Forest Service Construction and Operating Plan level. And so at that point, we'd be looking at it into greater detail and making sure that it's minimizing disturbance, avoiding trees, vegetation, rock outcrops to the extent practical.
So there could be some new road construction to extend from what the existing
There
is?
could be, yes, but it would be temporary and it would be restored back to its natural state.
Okay, thank you, that answered it.
Anyone else? Nathan?
Hi, Heather. Thank you for your presentation. First, I'd like to say thank you for removing the GasX portion of this. I think that was wise. It made it more clear what we were addressing, so thank you. I want to ask my question, I think in a way where it's a yes or no answer, but the way you've written the recommendation, if we go with that, could the applicant also choose alternative 2 and 3? Could they still build 2 and 3?
The conditions associated with the project right now are alternative 4 only.
So with the recommendations as they're written,
As they're written is alternative 4 only.
is only alternative 4. Thank you.
All right, I think that covers us. Thank you very much. Heather, would the applicant like to address the commission?
Good morning. So thank you all for the opportunity to address you today on this really fantastic project going forward. I'm Ron Cohen, president of Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows. And thank you as well to Joe and the Forest Service team, all the consultants who've worked on this, county staff. It's been a long haul since I was here just a year ago when the draft EIR came out. So I'll try to quickly address a couple of high-level points here as we pull up the PowerPoint. I've got a great PowerPoint with a few words and no pictures, so we'll spend as little time on that as possible. I'll start with a really key point here, and Heather made it in her presentation. I just want to really highlight it. 9-1 was the total vote of the 2 MACs that addressed this issue. So, between Squaw Valley MAC and the NITRAC, 9-1 on a Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows project, I think that speaks a lot, and I don't want to have that point be missed here. We have community support from the people who've been appointed to represent the communities where this project takes place. So on to the next slide. Why do this? When you read the objection letters, when you hear people talk about it, everybody's got an idea of why we want to do this, why we shouldn't do it, why the project makes sense, why it doesn't make sense. I can tell you from an operator's perspective, this project makes a lot of sense. It is an amazing change in the skier experience. So at the Squaw Valley MAC, this went back and forth. It doesn't make sense. You could just run more shuttles. Nobody's going to ski it. It doesn't open any new terrain. Fred Ilfeld, who is a longtime Squaw Valley resident and has been adverse to the ski area, particularly on the village, got up and said, you do this because it dramatically changes the skier experience for people who visit Squaw and Alpine. That's why you build this project. He recounted how he's been to ski areas all over the United States and Europe, and this is the type of project that makes a world-class ski area. And so that was fantastic to see somebody who's vocally opposed us in the past get up and call this project what it is, which is an incredible change for skiers and riders. And so, people come back and say, well, there's no skier growth out of it. The EIR says no real skier growth. Yeah, this is a skier retention and skier experience project. We're going to build this gondola to connect these two resorts, and people are going to have an amazing experience skiing it, and they're going to keep coming to Squaw and Alpine. And they're going to keep being enthused by the experience they have when they ski, that connection with the outdoors, all the things that really turns people on about skiing, that drives 7 million skier visits a year in California and 1 million this year at Squaw and Alpine. This just really fires that up. So it's a fantastic project from a skier experience perspective, from an operator's perspective. The point that we're now under common ownership, that's not a reason to do it, that's what makes it possible. This is something that's been around since the very beginning of these ski areas. So, I have on this, Connecting the Resorts, been on the board since the beginning. And when you look at the history of Squaw and Alpine, you had Squaw developing starting in 1949 with Cushing and Polson, and Cushing's pushing out Polson and bringing in the Olympics. And right at about the time the Olympics was coming in 1960, you had a guy named John Riley. And John Riley had a vision. He wanted to build another ski area in the valley next door. And he took a guy named Peter Clausen up to the top of KT, and he stood at the top of KT and he looked down the other side and he said, I want to build a lift right here. What do you think? I want to build another ski area. And Clausen looked at it and said, yeah, you don't want to build a lift right here, south-facing, avalanche-prone. You want to build there. And he pointed to where Alpine Meadows Ski Resort is now. And that's how the notion of Alpine Meadows got created. And at that exact same time, Riley looked over and said, what would be really cool would be if we could connect these two places. And that's just a matter of historical fact. From the very beginning, the idea was that one day these places could play together. Now, history got in the way of that, and the two places had a culture that at times was very aggressive against each other. That's not the case anymore. And so our ownership of these two places makes it possible to do this, but it's not the reason to do it. And so, when you think about that, going back to John Riley, what John Riley did after that conversation was he went out and he started Alpine Meadows of Tahoe, Inc. And that's the company, the corporation that started building the Alpine Meadows ski area. And the next thing he did was he went out and he formed a board of directors. And he got 10 or 12 people to be on that board of directors. One of those people was a guy named Bester Robinson. And if you've heard of Bester Robinson, you might have run into his name on a plaque. He helped build the Claire Tappan Lodge, an original director of Alpine Meadows of Tahoe. He also was a noted mountaineer, also an attorney. He was on the board of directors of the Sierra Club from 1935 to 1966. And he was the president of the Sierra Club from 46 to 48. And so all that time when he's there as a founding board member of Alpine Meadows, and they're having that discussion about building that ski area, and John Riley's there going, one day we're going to connect these places. You have a guy who at the same time is at the front of the Sierra Club. All through those years, through 1964, on the board of directors when the Wilderness Act was advocated for and passed, a person who saw that these things can live together was at the heart of both of those movements. And so very different than where we are today when you read some of the comment letters that come in. Probably something that we could strive for today is that ability to hold both of those ideas in your mind at the same time, that wilderness is important and outdoor experience is important, but so is skiing, and skiing requires development. It's developed skiing. That's what it is. And so, again, from the very beginning, this was envisioned, and from the very beginning, this is part of the experience that people have striven to have. You talked a bit about general plan and consistency with general plan, because that's some of the action that's in front of you to take today. Alpine Meadows general plan from 1969 recognizes explicitly that unfortunately the Alpine Meadows area will never have the ability to develop the type of amenities that are needed for overnight ski use. And so people have to travel outside to get, to stay over and to get the amenities that they need. And it expressly recognizes that that creates traffic. And so the traffic mitigating aspects of this were seen going back now 50 years, that if you could get a different way to get in and out of there to get to the place where you stay overnight, it's going to mitigate traffic. So we've got really detailed traffic studies, 216 cars, 273 cars, 9 seconds here, 23 seconds there, really slicing that layer of the onion incredibly thin. We can step up to a higher level and see that it's fairly common sense to say that if we can get back and forth on a conveyance that doesn't require the car, that we're going to see some traffic mitigating impacts. The Squaw Valley General Plan in 1983. At that time, there was an application to build what became now the Shirley Lake Lift. There was a permit, a conditional use permit that had been issued. It hadn't been constructed yet in 1983. So there was a lot of opposition to building that lift. So they put in the general plan. That permit is out there for that lift, and we'd really like them not to build it. And if they don't build it, we highly recommend to the county that you issue the plan and the permit instead to build the siphon lift. What was the purpose of the siphon lift? It was to connect the skiing experience between the two ski areas. So all the way back then, different way of doing it, but that idea of having that connection, it's embodied in the Squaw Valley General Plan. And so that we're making a general plan amendment to Squaw Valley because that map that got attached to that 1983 plan said if the line isn't on this map as a possible future lift, you need to amend the general plan in order to build it. You got to do all this stuff we're doing right now. And so that's why we're doing this. That ought to be on there. The siphon lift is never going to get built, but the notion of connecting the two places, the purpose of it, it's the same thing. And so it's in line, what we're asking for is in line with both of those general plans. So, like I said, under common ownership, our agreement with Mr. Caldwell allows us to cross the land, and the changes to that agreement since the project was originally proposed allow us to cross on the alternative for alignment. So great stuff. Now, a huge review process has occurred. You asked a question about building on alternatives 2 and 3. We've formally withdrawn the application to build on 2 and 3. Our proposal is to build 4. And so that's not an option for us going forward. We're clearly all about alternative 4. You know, a lot of comments about the Granite Chief Wilderness. Want to be really clear here. There's letters in the record from lawyers, but I want to say it from the podium. This project doesn't cross the wilderness. It doesn't. It just doesn't. This project doesn't cross the piece of land that is aspirational wilderness, that 177 acres of land that Mr. Caldwell owns, that the government would like to see, per their laws, would like to see as wilderness, but is his private property at this time to do with what he pleases under the law. This project doesn't cross that either. And so it doesn't cross the wilderness, it doesn't cross the aspirational wilderness. I just want to be perfectly clear about that. It's outside of that acreage. You know, we had in January, I believe, there was a kerfuffle that one of the opposition groups started and went and got a couple of the other opposition groups to sign a letter to the county and to the Forest Service saying, you have to start everything over. That 2-volume set of EIR, EIS, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. You got to throw it all in the trash and start over because Squaw was hiding the fact that they had a lease to go across the Caldwell land, and that lease is going to prevent forever the aspirational wilderness from becoming wilderness because Squaw will forever have the right on that land. So I went to one of those groups and explained to them that that's not the case, that alternative 4 is the preferred alternative. It's not even on that land, and that we'd subsequently gotten an agreement to cross on alternative 4, and that under our agreements with the landowner, all of our rights to cross at alternative 2 spring over to alternative 4, and we have no rights left in alternative 2. So, this has been a topic that's been used to hammer home ideas that we're somehow violating wilderness. We're not. We're not violating wilderness. We're not violating aspirational wilderness. We don't have any rights in the alternative 2 alignment that are going to stay around forever and prevent there from being wilderness. So we can just we can put that aside. Now, let's also be contextual. I love wilderness. I spend a lot of time in the wilderness. I understand the value of wilderness. The Granite Chief Wilderness is 26,000 acres. And this issue and all the arguments you hear about the cumulative impacts of some piece of noise that might be heard in the aspirational wilderness, let alone the actual wilderness on those 177 acres, 26,000 acres right behind it are wilderness. 15 million acres in California are designated wilderness. 15 million acres, 15% of the land of the state of California is designated wilderness. And we're being attacked as wilderness violators for wanting to build a lift that's not even on the aspirational wilderness that's next to the wilderness. So it's just not the case, and we got to be real clear about that. So visual effects, we've been through that. At the NITRAC, one of the commissioners made it really clear. He's lived in Alpine Meadows for over 40 years, and his statement was, this is a man-altered landscape. It's got stuff on it now, and so you can see the lifts where this goes. This is one more lift. Yes, it alters that visually, but this is not a pristine environment, to my prior comments. So just want to be clear about that. Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog, lots of hoops jumped on this, really clear on this point. During the analysis, a frog was found at Barstool Lake, one frog at Barstool Lake. This project isn't anywhere near Barstool Lake. Barstool Lake is off in the distance. So what do we get? We get comments, and that's actually made clear if you read the Granite Chief Protection League's letter. They actually say in it very clearly, the only frog, actual living frog habitat is Barstool Lake. Now, the government's drawn the Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog critical habitat line much more broadly. It encompasses our entire asphalt parking lot at Squaw Valley. So it's easy to make those arguments. Can a frog live in the asphalt at Squaw in the parking lot? I don't think so. But it's drawn into the map, so it gives you that opportunity to make that argument. One of the comments, one of the objections filed with the Forest Service from the Pacific Crest Trail Association, for narrowing this down, we're not running it during the summertime. We're not running it during the time when the frogs are there. We're not near Barstool Lake where the one frog is. We're way down the hill, far away from it, in a different climate altogether. The PCTA, the Pacific Crest Trail Association, says, well, you should reject the project. You should reject the project because there's going to be a couple of occasions in the summertime where we may need to put a cabin on the line in order to do summer maintenance. And that summer maintenance is going to disturb the frog. For example, I'm quoting, shadows cast on the ground as gondola cars pass overhead and noise from workers riding on the chairs are two of the many possibilities of how we're going to unavoidably and unmitigatably disturb the frog at Barstool Lake. And so, they make that argument, the PCTA, the Pacific Crest Trail Association, that the shadow is going to bother the frog. What about the 38,000 hikers that go up the same trail with their dogs and their fishing poles and all the things that they're doing up there at the 5 lakes? Is the PCTA arguing that the 38,000 people shouldn't be allowed to go up there if there's a frog around? Compared to the shadow of the maintenance day of the cabin. I think we can put that into context, that that's not a valid argument. So traffic and transportation, I think we talked to it before. We have done an amazing amount of work to mitigate the traffic issues. We're doing a great work in the area. So the Mountaineer was mentioned. Mountaineer, in its short period, 4.5 months, did 80,000 rides. We didn't put any money into marketing for that. 80,000 rides. People realized how valuable it was. There were use cases that we never really contemplated to be the use cases. It's a transportation method. You put it out there and people figure out how to use it for their benefit. And it was incredible the difference it made. So the EIR points out 16, 17, which was a big snow year. Like this year, we had 40 parkouts at Squaw and Alpine. This year, we had 6. And so we'll continue to whittle that down and whittle down the parking impacts. As parking impacts are mitigated, that really helps with traffic impacts on the road as well. And so we'll continue to do that. I hate to point out the PCTA again. You can read one of their comment letters that they sent on the original, on the draft EIR. They actually wrote that our project should be conditioned on us building a parking lot for the Five Lakes Trailhead, because there's not enough parking for the Five Lakes Trailhead. We've got a parking lot that parks 3,000 people about a half a mile away at the ski area. But the environmental organization wants us to pave over some more forest to build a trailhead parking lot within a half a mile of a massive parking lot. Is that really a comment, or is it just something meant to derail the process? And I submit that for your consideration on that point. So, look, great recreational impacts here. The noise impacts are incredibly mitigated. We're in this continuing to narrow down any kind of vagueness in our operating times. It's now very clear. Lots of objections about vagueness in the operating times. It's set to specific dates now. So this notion mentioned in one of the letters and at the Squaw Valley MAC that we're going to go out and make snow on one run in August. So that we can, this is actually the comment, we're going to go out and make snow on one run in August so that we can say we're in winter operations, so that we can run the gondola. That's the kind of commentary being made here. Anybody who's ever tried to make snow in August would know that that's a fool's errand. And so that's not what we're looking to do here. We're looking to link the two ski areas, improve the skier experience, create an incredible asset for this community that keeps us forefront in the mind of people who are planning their trips, keeps us forefront in the mind of people when they decide whether to renew that ski pass and bring their money generating tax dollars up in our area, in our tourism-based economy. That's what we're looking to do. We're not looking to build ski runs in August. So I'll wrap up real quickly here on my points. We had wide-ranging support. I think you see that support taking the lead, grabbing the momentum. 207 comment letters in opposition originally with the closure of the Forest Service FEIR-DIS or FEIS process down to 12. And so we've really overcome a lot of that, and I think we can overcome the rest of it. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions, and also like to reserve an opportunity to address any comments that are made from the public. Thank you.
I have a question. As you walk up the Five Lakes Trail, you pass by some existing towers.
Yes.
It doesn't look like that's being really used as a ski lift, but maybe you could explain what that's all about.
Yeah, so the owner of that is Mr. Caldwell, who's here. That's his lift. He started building that. He can give you the exact details on it, but it was never completed, and so those towers are still there. It's not our land. They're not our towers. What they do is they give you a general idea of where this proposed alignment would go, very close to those. And I think that this lift will serve the same purpose as that. There have been comments that have said our project approval should be conditioned on us removing those towers. They're not our towers and it's not our land, so that's not something we can do. And I don't think that's an appropriate condition for our project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Questions?
Thank you very much.
Questions? No? Okay. Before we open things up to the public, so do we have a timer here? Okay. So we'll open comment up. We'd like you to limit your comments to about 3 minutes. You'll see a yellow light come on when you've got your last minute left kind of thing. If you could kind of gather your thoughts and wind things up before the red light and the beeper starts going off, we would appreciate it. So that being said, we'll open it up to public comment. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Tom Moores. I'm Executive Director of Sierra Watch. And I think I should start to make sure that you are in receipt of our letter. So do I leave this copy with somebody or are we good? Right. You're good. I will keep it as a souvenir. The point I wanted to make today is that the project that's before you today is portrayed as a gondola that would serve skiers traveling from Alpine Meadows to Squaw Valley and reverse. But it would be much more than that. And its impacts, therefore, could be much more than what was reviewed in the EIR. And in particular, it's not just a base to a base, there's a middle. And that middle is the White Wolf property. And there's as I think it was mentioned, there's a current proposed subdivision for that property that's pending before the county, but that subdivision has not been reviewed in and of itself, and then certainly not as part of this project. And this is a classic case of segmentation, which is something that the California Environmental Quality Act specifically guards against. CEQA defines a project as the whole of an action, and settled law demands that, quote, environmental considerations do not become submerged by chopping a large project into many little ones, each with a potential impact on the environment, which cumulatively may have disastrous consequences, end quote. But that's actually what's happening here, because the EIR attempts to chop off one part of the White Wolf project, the gondola, apart from the pending application for the subdivision. And this isn't some Chicken Little conspiracy theory. This is actually readily apparent if you look at the map of the proposed gondola and alternative 4, and in particular for the station on the White Wolf property, and compare it to the map that's been submitted as an application for development. They line up because, again, that gondola and that station would really be a central, if not the central feature of this proposed development. So I think you could argue in a general sense that that's not planning to ignore those two things and not put them together. And I think the lawyers could definitely argue that it's a violation of CEQA. Just stepping back and looking at this project, Sierra Watch can imagine a gondola that travels between Squaw Valley and Alpine Meadows as part of a broad vision for responsible development in the region, and that takes into account this pending application for development on White Wolf, and that also respects the values of wilderness and wildlife habitat. Is that a warning, or I'll sum up?
That's your time, so go ahead and wrap things up.
Great.
If you would, please.
I will. The problem is that every action analyzed in the final EIR, including alternative 4, really fails to do that. And given that approval is not really an option, And so we would urge you to either deny the project or recommend that staff modify the alternatives to address the inadequacies of environmental analysis and in order to secure sound planning and conform with state law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jeff Shelato, and I testified a year ago when you had the hearing on the draft EIR-EIS. I'm a second-generation homeowner from Truckee. I'm a longtime skier in the region, bought season passes at Squaw and Alpine. I currently limit that to Sugar Bowl because the traffic has just become unacceptable, trying to get between here and the resorts. In the mid-'70s, I was chair of the Granite Chief Task Force for the Sierra Club. I think that's important because we heard a little history about trying to link the Sierra Club to this being part of some dream. It was a dream to have Granite Chief become a wilderness back in the 50s and 60s. I was chair of that task force for the Motherlode chapter until it became a part of the wilderness bill that passed in 1984. And that predated the time that Mr. Caldwell bought the property from Southern Pacific Land Company. That happened in 1989. Wilderness Act was passed for Grand Chief in '84. And it was done to stop old growth logging in the Diamond Crossing area and to prevent expansion of these ski resorts. I want to limit my comments now to 5 issues that I've raised at the MAC hearings that generated a fair amount of discussion. If the gondola is truly just to transport skiers in the wintertime, then that limitation needs to be, in effect, codified in the permit. And, you know, they initially said it was April 1st would be the cutoff, and whenever the ski resort started in the fall would be when it would resume. We would propose that that be a hard date of like April 1st each year, and October 31st, and that operating it in between be expressly prohibited. Secondly, I don't really think this is justified for transportation because the analysis clearly shows that it's not effective. If this is not to become a year-round amenity like the tram and iCamp, then that limitation on seasonal operations should be, you should express your will in approving this, that it be a condition that can't be changed for at least 50 years. That's similar to like endangered species permits that have a duration for 50 years. As far as mitigation, it's pretty clear Mr. Caldwell's a partner in this project, and it is reasonable that he remove those other towers as mitigation under CEQA. They're almost on top of each other. There is no entitlement to build that chairlift. And my last point is I think Mr. Cohen mentioned there's 38,000 people that use that trail. If this is going to take place as a construction over one season, then there needs to be more than signage put at the trailhead that when there will be closures that will happen. I think the public is entitled to a little more than 2 weeks' notice at the trailhead. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I get until noon? Is that right?
Well,
I'm kidding.
no.
Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, my name is Daniel D. Hegarty. I am the director of the Granite Chief Wilderness Protection League. Our letter to the Forest Service includes 8 very specific objections to the final EIR and the record of decision. That letter is filled with citations about case law and your own guidance documents. What I am about to address, I don't want you to infer that this is any negative comment on your staff. I think your staff, the project staff, have done a very good job. I think the criticism is all to Joe Flannery with Forest Service, so he's the guy I'm going to attack. I'm kidding. Segmentation is your greatest weakness, and I believe we would succeed in court on this issue. Every one of the build alternatives has that Alpine Midway station in the middle of the Caldwell property, which would also be in the middle of the White Wolf development. Caldwell built the first chairlift, or part of it, 15 years ago. It was never completed, probably for financial reasons. Now the gondola comes in and the White Wolf project proceeds. You have known about the White Wolf project and its connection with this and other developments, including horse equestrian facilities, tennis courts, 38 houses, and all that. Yet you have continued to decide to keep those separate and distinct. And we don't think that's appropriate and or legally defensible. There's no reason for that midway station but for the White Wolf development. It does not meet the purpose and need of the project. CEQA and NEPA are very clear about segmentation. The whole purpose of it is to segment large developments that would impact something, in this case a wilderness. You separate them out and then it's all incremental. Well, White Wolf won't be so bad because we've got a gondola going in there anyway. The gondola affects the wilderness. Contrary to Mr. Cohen's comments, the gondola is seen and heard from in the wilderness. The EIS only takes one visual analysis from within the wilderness. I could find 10 to 20 places where this gondola would be visually and auditorily impacting the wilderness. So it's not plausible. Another area of particular, so the gondola is a catalyst for additional development. Regarding the construction of an unnecessary road in a designated wilderness, from what Mr. Cohen just discussed, we're good with that. If they stay out of the designated wilderness in any road construction, then a major objective is taken off. The CEQA, the county decided that the CEQA doesn't require you to look at impacts on adjacent wilderness. In fact, the case law is pretty clear and found against the county of Riverside in 1999. You do have to consider impacts to a wilderness. So there's a flaw in the EIS.
Mr. Hagerty, you are out of time. Can you try to wrap up your thoughts for us fairly quick here, if you would, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me hit on the frog. I can't help it, but I resent what Mr. Cohen said about the frog. Our letter did not say that that's the only place where the frog is. The history of the frog and the natural history requirements for its recovery is to have dispersion corridors. Right now, to our knowledge, Barstow Lake is the only where they're breeding. They have to get down to Bear Creek eventually if we are to protect that species. This is a unique population, and it has to go down through that property of White Wolf and the gondola. So you're remiss, and we will challenge the Forest Service on that issue as well. So in summary, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, just to be real clear on this, you're insufficient in a number of CEQA and NEPA violations that we believe the courts will find impermissible. Either the Alpine Mid Station is removed or we will sue for a complete rewrite of the EIS-EIR. Mitigations must be irrevocable and unquestionably enforceable. So the season of May 31st is not acceptable. That's not science-based. The frogs are moving in early spring. You can't have skiers around there when they're dispersing. So it's got to be science-based, not an arbitrary business decision. Thank you very much, and I apologize for my extended time. Thank you for your patience.
Anyone else?
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Nicole Lutzkamore. I serve on the North Dollar Regional Advisory Council. If you reviewed our recommendation or our minutes from the last meeting, I was the sole member that voted against the recommendation to proceed with this project, and I'm here to assert that opinion and to ask you to not approve what the county and the Squaw Valley and Ron Cohen is asking for. I believe there's a couple of really important reasons that this project should be denied and moving forward, some of which I'm sure have already been stated, as well as what was just stated in the comment before me. I believe that this project is not being evaluated for its cumulative impacts with the White Wolf project, which has already been stated. It's going to take the county back into court, waste a bunch of public money trying to defend that assertion. Outside of the White Wolf project, in general, cumulative impacts of the development in the North Tahoe region are being ignored. Impacts to the Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog, as was just stated. I won't get into that, but it's a species that needs to be protected. Building this project over its habitat would threaten the species even more than it's already being threatened. In addition, the impacts to Alpine Meadows, the community there, and the culture there are also undeniable. And I think the objections that have been made on paper officially, I agree with, and I just wanted to make sure that my objection to this project was stated officially. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Gavin Lura. Had the privilege of growing up in Squaw Valley. A couple of things I'd like to speak to. One, in terms of community support. I'm not personally sure where that support is coming from, as next to none of the people in my immediate community network support this project or see it as a good idea for the future. A lot has been said about the enhancement of the skier experience, and I'd like everybody to consider that there are already upwards of 40 ski lifts between Squaw Valley and Alpine Meadows. And my question in terms of this development is, when is enough? And is perpetual growth and expansion in the interest of corporate profits really what we need to live by here in the Sierras? Mr. Cohen spoke heavily to historical ideas of connecting these two resorts, that this was something that was envisioned from the beginning. And I'd like to note that so was a freeway around the lake over the entrance to Emerald Bay. And just because this was envisioned in the past doesn't mean that it was a good idea. So I urge you to consider the preservation of the area for future generations. There are many additional things that I could say about this project and why it is unnerving to me, but I'll leave it at that, as many of the other speakers have already addressed those topics. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
All right, thank you. Good morning. Jennifer Kwashnik here for Friends of the West Shore. I'll be brief because a lot of the other speakers have reiterated concerns that we've already addressed, but we also had submitted a letter along with the Sierra Club. And so we appreciate the amount of work that has gone into this, and we appreciate that Alternative 2 was taken off the table. However, we still have some concerns, one being traffic, and although there is a nice list of a lot of things that are going on, and we're hearing some successes, it sounds like, of some pilot programs, these are things that are in progress to address traffic problems that we're already experiencing. So again, we have a project that's going to increase traffic. It's documented out in the environmental document. And so what we've recommended is to adopt a performance standard and look at no net increase. And we realize you can't formulate every solution at this point, but if you have these standards, at least then it gives you somewhere in the future to say, hey, we need to do more. Because what we're doing now is just simply to try to get at the impacts we already have from existing development. We also support the idea of further limiting the operation dates, as has been suggested, in order to protect those values, including the frog needs. And then also we're concerned about the White Wolf development as well, and the segmentation that appears to be going on, and how that may facilitate that project. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. Mr. Cohen, did you want to respond to any of that? You're good? Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll close the public hearing portion and bring it back to the commissioners.
I just want to make it clear as it relates to White Wolf. It's not come before this commission. We have no information related to that. So we're making this decision specifically related to this project and nothing else. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. Anyone else? We have a motion.
Would it be possible to get it
Can we
back
get the
up there?
recommendation back up on the screen, please?
Yeah, it has to be on the screen, doesn't it?
It does. Well, a lot of times it's more abbreviated. I like the,
We like abbreviated.
yeah, whatever's legally. Short. Whatever legally works, right?
Yes. We'll leave it to the attorney here, huh?
So this is one of four.
Okay. All right, I'd like to make a motion for our recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to adopt a resolution to certify the Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows Base-to-Base Gondola Final Environmental Impact Report prepared pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act and adopt the Mitigated and Monitoring Report Program supported by and incorporated by reference in its entirety, the findings of fact and overriding considerations, and adopt the errata.
Have a motion and a second.
I have a first by Mr. Nader and a second by Mr. Sevison. Could I have a vote from Mr. Cannon, please?
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Thank you.
Could you put up the next one? Thank you very much. Oh, good, it's shorter. I'd like to further move for a recommendation of the Board of Supervisors to adopt a resolution to amend the Squaw Valley General Plan and Land Use Ordinance, potential future ski lifts map.
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Do I need to add something?
We'll just note that needs to be supported by the findings contained in the staff report as well.
Yes, thank you.
I'll second that.
Have a motion and a second. Roll call, please, Sue.
I have a first by Mr. Nader, a second by Mr. Herzog. Vote from Mr. Cannon, please.
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Thank you.
I would further move that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors to adopt an ordinance to rezone the Alpine Meadows base area portion of the project site and the related findings.
That works.
Have a motion and a second by Mr. Sevison.
I'm sorry, the second was Mr. Herzog? Mr. Sevison, thank you. First from Mr. Nader, a second from Mr. Sevison. A vote from Mr. Cannon, please.
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is the last one, right, Heather?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, then I will end it with a motion to approve, or recommend, thank you, to the Board of Supervisors to approve the conditional use permit for Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows base-to-base gondola and related findings. Is there anything else?
Yep, no, that works.
Motion and a second.
I have a motion from Mr. Nader, a second from Mr. Sevison. A vote from Mr. Cannon.
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I think that concludes our business today. Thank you all for coming out and for your participation. We'll see you at the next meeting.